Hey guys, tonight we drift quietly into the dim, echoing corridors of medieval Europe, those long, cold stone passages where kings moved like living symbols, polished on the outside, cracked on the inside. You feel the air shift as you step deeper, the torchlight flickering like it's trying to warn you that royalty in this age is mostly illusion. A polished crown balancing on top of some very messy human behavior. Behind every statue, every heroic tapestry, every monk's flattering chronicle, there are whispers. Little scandals. Big ones too. Things so chaotic that if you were dropped into this world for even 10 minutes, you probably wouldn't survive the court politics, let alone the poison-tasting rituals. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you. I always love seeing how many of you are drifting off together across different time zones. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step into the Great Hall, the one every tourist would admire centuries later, but right now it smells faintly of smoke, sweat, and something a bit sour that probably comes from the kitchens experimenting again. A king sits at the far end, framed by carved lions, and he looks every bit the picture of power. But when you get close, you notice his hand tapping nervously on the arm of the throne like he's keeping track of two different secrets at once. That's the truth behind many medieval rulers. What they showed the world wasn't the real story. One mainstream fact you might already know is that kings weren't actually absolute rulers most of the time. They shared, negotiated, and wrestled for power with nobles, churchmen, generals, and sometimes even their own servants. Kingship was less, I command, you obey, and more like juggling fire while blindfolded. Which sounds dramatic, sure, but medieval chroniclers also worked very hard to hide the blemishes. They wanted their rulers to look chosen by God, not caught cheating at dice or panicking about a bad harvest. But here's the quirky tidbit. One of the biggest tools used to protect royal reputations was the court entertainer, the jester, the musician, the storyteller. These people were the medieval PR team before PR existed. They could twist a scandal into a joke into a lesson, and a lesson into, oh, the king is totally fine, everyone relax. Imagine a comedian today being hired to distract the entire country from a tax fraud investigation. That's basically what was happening. As you move through the hall, you begin to sense it. The court is a stage, and the king is the main actor, desperately trying not to forget his lines. And historians still argue whether the most famous kings of the era even believed their own propaganda. Some claimed divine visions, others insisted angels helped them plan military campaigns. Were these true beliefs? Clever manipulations? Or maybe just the medieval version of, I'm not wrong, God told me to do it? Scholars genuinely debate how much these rulers were self-aware versus how much they were trapped inside the myth they created. A servant glides past you, carrying a platter of roasted something. You're not entirely sure what animal that is, and honestly, the smell doesn't help. He keeps his eyes down, because making eye contact with a king was sometimes illegal. Not because the king was particularly intimidating, but because eye contact might reveal that he was exhausted, stressed, or terrified about whatever secret was swirling around his reign that week. You hover closer to the dais and notice the quiet tension between the king and the nobles seated at his right. Their conversations sound polite, but their eyes flicker like people constantly calculating who's losing favor, who's gaining it, who's about to be implicated in something unpleasant. It's like a medieval version of workplace drama, except instead of passive-aggressive emails, they used armed retainers and legal charges of treason. The king's smile falters as he catches sight of a parchment being delivered by a messenger. It's sealed with wax, but you can tell from his expression that whatever's inside is not good news. A scandal? A debt he can't pay? A noble threatening rebellion again? Maybe a rumor about where he spent last night? It all blends together in the heavy atmosphere of royal expectation. And this is where you begin to understand the real theme. Medieval kings were walking contradictions. They were powerful, yet constantly endangered. Revered, yet deeply insecure. Surrounded by wealth, yet unable to trust anyone, not even the people sleeping under the same roof. Royalty came with an endless list of "do not let anyone find out" about this, and every court in Europe had a different assortment of secrets simmering at its core. You notice the musicians striking up a soft tune, trying to smooth out the tension. Courtiers laugh too loudly at jokes that aren't funny. Advisors whisper behind rings and sleeves. A visiting bishop crosses himself twice, which is never a good sign. And the king, he sits there pretending he has everything under control, even though the flicker in his eyes says otherwise. You lean back a little, letting the torchlight settle, and realize that this entire glittering hall is built not just on stone and taxes, but on the quiet hope that the king's scandals stay hidden long enough for him to keep the throne. Some secrets will unravel slowly, others will explode. And you're about to walk through all of them, one by one, closer than anyone in that hall would ever dare. You slip out of the bustling great hall and into a quieter corridor, the kind where the torches burn low and the tapestries look like they're eavesdropping. Here, you feel the weight of something different, something younger, more fragile, because tonight you step into the uneasy world of a boy king, the kind medieval Europe loved to glorify in paintings but secretly dreaded in real life. A crown on a child is charming in artwork, but in practice, it's a political nightmare wearing tiny shoes. You walk into his private chamber, and there he sits no older than 12, maybe 13 legs, dangling off a throne-like chair that's much too big for him. The crown weighs so heavily on his head that it tilts, and an advisor has to discreetly nudge it back into place. It would almost be adorable if the stakes weren't so high. Behind him, his tutors stand stiff as boards, pretending everything is fine, while two nobles in the corner are already arguing in low whispers about who technically controls the kingdom until the boy comes of age. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Medieval child rulers were puppet magnets. Every regency was a tug-of-war between aristocrats, churchmen, royal uncles, and ambitious generals. A young monarch was less leader and more symbolic lever. Everyone wanted to pull in their direction. And the boy king in front of you feels that pressure, even if he can't fully understand it. His hands fidget with a carved wooden toy hidden under his robes, a reminder he was playing in the gardens not long ago before the crown landed on him like a falling anvil. You shift closer, and that's when you catch it. The secret. The boy looks terrified every time his uncle standing behind him moves. Not the normal kind of kid scared, but something deeper. You sense the kind of fear you'd see in someone who knows a truth they're not allowed to speak. The uncle rests a hand on the boy's shoulder for a moment, and the child freezes. No one else reacts, which tells you everyone knows, and everyone had agreed never to show it. Historians still argue whether regents in these situations protected child kings or manipulated them into silence. The truth varies depending on the monarch, the era, and which chronicler was brave enough or foolish enough to hint at what was really happening. But in this case, you can practically see the tension radiating off the boy's tiny shoulders. A quirky tidbit here. Medieval tutors often taught kings royal posture by tying a small wooden board to their backs to make them sit straight. Imagine being 12, scared of your uncle, stuck between warring nobles, and strapped into posture equipment like a medieval orthodontic device. The poor kid can't even slouch his way through emotional distress. You watch as a council meeting begins. The boy is technically the king, but he speaks only when prompted. Every time he tries to answer a question on his own, one of the tutors clears their throat sharply, a sound so rehearsed it's basically a parental shock collar. They don't want him saying the wrong thing. They don't want him revealing whatever secret they're hiding. They don't want him to accidentally show the court how fragile their control truly is. A messenger arrives with news. Rebels in the provinces have taken advantage of the king's youth and refuse to pay taxes. The nobles erupt into debate, each pushing the boy to support their recommended punishment. The uncle leans close and whispers something into the boy's ear. The child nods mechanically and repeats the words in a shaky voice. It's a strange moment. You're watching power travel like electricity through a cable, passing through the boy but never stopping with him. The tension spikes when a knight kneels to present a gift, a ceremonial dagger meant to symbolize adulthood. The boy reaches for it, his hand trembling. His uncle places his own hand over the child's and guides the grip. The entire court applauds. But you can tell from the boy's pale face that the gesture means something else, something threatening, something everyone has decided to pretend is fine. You shift your weight, and the stone beneath your boots feels colder. This chamber is thick with unspoken danger. You suddenly understand why this king's reign would later be remembered as troubled, unsettled, or that historian favorite euphemism, complicated. All very polite ways of saying, we don't talk about what actually happened. As the meeting ends, the young king is ushered out. The moment he crosses the doorway and the nobles are out of sight, his posture collapses. He looks small again. A frightened child again. He whispers something to his tutor, too soft for most ears, but you catch it because the room has gone dead silent. I don't want to be king anymore. The tutor flinches like he's been struck. The uncle turns sharply, and for a second, the boy freezes again. You can feel your breath catch without meaning to. The uncle pastes on a smile and says, "Nonsense, my king. You are exactly where God wants you. But even you can tell God isn't the one making the decisions here." The boy takes a step back, gripping the dagger too tightly. A single bead of sweat rolls down his temple. Outside, the crowd cheers his name, completely unaware that their ruler is standing on trembling legs. That's the tragedy of a child on a throne. The kingdom sees a symbol of hope. The court sees a tool. And the boy, he sees everyone watching him, waiting for him to play along, because if he doesn't, the secret behind that forced calm will crack open. And you realize something chilling. The worst scandal in this court isn't what the king has done. It's what the king is enduring. You leave the boy king's chamber behind, slipping once more into the maze of corridors where whispers coil like smoke. The air shifts as you walk lighter now, warmer, even as if you're drifting toward a court that prides itself, not on obedience or discipline, but gossip. And at its shimmering center sits a ruler whose scandal isn't fear or coercion, but love. Wild, bold, inconvenient love. You step into a chamber where sunlight spills over velvet cushions, embroidered screens, and gilded goblets. This king's world is softer, more perfumed, more theatrical. A harp plays in the corner. Laughter bubbles through the air. Courtiers lean close, whispering with that unmistakable mix of delight and terror that comes from knowing someone important has done something very stupid. Because this particular king is famous, infamous, really for letting his heart make decisions that his brain definitely should have handled. He lounges on a low bench, surrounded by admirers, his robe slipping off one shoulder in a way that's probably accidental, but also very not accidental. You notice how his gaze keeps drifting toward one person in particular, someone a little too near, a little too familiar, someone the entire court is pretending not to notice. Here's your mainstream historical fact for this section. Kings marrying for love in medieval Europe was extremely rare. Most royal marriages were business deals, alliances packaged in lace. Choosing a partner based on personal affection, or worse, infatuation, was considered reckless, bordering on dangerous. Every noble family expected to benefit from a royal marriage. Every foreign power waited to interpret it as a political message. So when a king fell in love with someone outside those networks? Oh, the drama. Imagine if your country's foreign policy hinged on whether a monarch had butterflies in his stomach. A servant brushes past you carrying wine, and you overhear the hushed conversations swirling around. He visits their chamber too often. The queen pretends not to know. Should we tell the bishop? Absolutely not, unless he already knows. Historians still argue whether they were just close friends. Yes, and I still argue whether pigs can fly. The jokes land lightly, but everyone here understands the risk. When a king's desires become predictable, manipulators drift in like moths to a torch. And this ruler, well, he's one enormous torch wrapped in silks. The quirky tidbit in this court? The king expresses affection through extremely dramatic gifts. You glance at a chest near the throne and notice embroidered gloves, love poems with more metaphors than a modern pop song, a falcon wearing a tiny collar engraved with initials, and your favorite, a carved wooden spoon shaped like two people embracing. Nothing says forbidden people, relationship. Like a romantic spoon. The courtiers play along because they must, but the rivalry is palpable. When the king laughs at his favorite companion's joke, 10 nobles immediately laugh louder, as if performing a vocal audition for relevance. Their eyes burn with jealousy, not necessarily because of romantic competition, but because influence flows wherever the king's affection aims. When his chosen person enters the chamber, it's like watching the moon pull tides. Heads turn, fans flutter, a knight nearly drops a tray of fruit, and the king brightens with such obvious joy that even you feel a little embarrassed on his behalf. And here comes the trouble. Tonight, a council meeting is scheduled boring, bureaucratic, and absolutely crucial. But instead of preparing, the king is whispering secrets behind a silk curtain with the person he adores. Every time a servant tries to summon him, he waves them away like a man refusing to leave a hot bath. His advisors gather outside, exchanging pained looks. One finally mutters, "If he does not attend, the barons will revolt again." Another sighs, "Let them. They always do." Historians still debate how much influence romantic partners actually held over medieval kings. Some argue the companions were scapegoats, blamed for political failures they never caused. Others insist certain favourites did control royal decisions, subtly shaping laws, wars, and alliances with well-timed whispers. You watch the king slip his hand into his lover's, and you can almost see decisions forming poorly, impulsively, dangerously. This is the kind of moment chroniclers later glossed over with phrases like, "the king was distracted," or "the court suffered from moral laxity." Medieval historian language is very polite when they really mean the king nearly blew up the country because he was hopelessly love-struck. A trumpet sounds outside the window, the official signal that the council is waiting. The king groans, dramatically, like a teenager being told to do chores. His companion smooths his robe, offers a soft smile, and murmurs something you don't quite catch. Whatever it is, the king straightens instantly, chest puffing with conviction. "Oh no," whispers one advisor beside you. "Oh yes," another murmurs. "This is going to be a disaster." A third sighs, because now the king is striding to the council chamber full of renewed passion not for governance, but for whatever advice he was just given by the person everyone knows he shouldn't be listening to. And you can feel it, like a low hum through the floor. This love, beautiful, human, messy, is about to shape laws, shift allegiances, and maybe even ignite a quiet civil war. Medieval Europe's greatest royal scandals weren't always about cruelty, murder, or corruption. Sometimes they were about a king who simply loved too boldly for a world built on caution. You follow the love-struck king down the corridor, but before you reach the council chamber, a quieter door catches your attention, half open, dimly lit, humming with tension. Something about it pulls you in, like a draft of cold air sliding under your collar. You step inside and find yourself in one of the most dangerous and politically charged spaces in any medieval palace. The royal bedchamber. Not the king's bedchamber, no. That would be too obvious. This room belongs to someone else entirely, someone whose presence is both invisible and essential. The keeper of secrets, the quiet architect of scandals, the person who sees everything and tells almost nothing. The bedchamber attendants. They shuffle around with practiced ease, smoothing sheets, refreshing candles, laying out fresh linens. But beneath their calm movements, you detect an undercurrent of dread. Because here, intimacy is currency, information is treasure, and one misstep, one overheard rumor, one misplaced item can topple a kingdom faster than a failed harvest. You step farther inside, and one attendant, an older woman, with eyes that look like they've seen too much, glances toward you as if to say, "Walk softly." Lives depend on what happens in these shadows. Here's the mainstream historical fact for this section. Medieval bedchambers weren't private retreats, they were political hubs. Servants didn't just change sheets. They monitored who visited, how long they stayed, and what state they left in. Their testimonies could make or break royal reputations. Their silence could save them. You wander past a carved cedar chest, its lid slightly ajar. Inside? Letters. Dozens of them. Some sealed, some ripped open, some clearly smuggled in or out. Love letters, confessions, bribes, warnings, every kind of forbidden communication you can imagine. And yes, you're tempted to read them. Don't even pretend you're not. But before you can lean closer, a soft voice whispers, "No, That single syllable carries centuries of meaning. This staff member knows opening one of those letters is the medieval equivalent of launching a dynastic war. A younger attendant ushers you toward a tapestry, pulling it aside to reveal a narrow door. A secret passage, of course. Every palace had them. You peer into the darkness and feel the cold air brush your face. That one, she whispers, is for people the king shouldn't be meeting. The older woman smacks her lightly with a cloth. Hush. Walls remember what we say. A quirky tidbit for you. Some bedchamber attendants were trained to sleep lightly to wake instantly if someone entered the room at night. Imagine having a job where not waking up could cause an international incident. You follow the attendants as they fold clothing and straighten cushions. There's a tension in the air, not the giddy spark you felt in the king's flirtatious court, but a thicker, heavier anxiety. These servants aren't worried about romance. They're worried about consequences. And tonight, consequences are brewing. You hear footsteps in the hall, heavy, insistent. A nobleman enters, ignoring every etiquette rule, brushing aside attendants like he owns the place. His jaw is tight. His eyes flash with the kind of anger that always means a scandal is moments away from detonating. He slams a ring onto the table, a signet ring belonging to someone else entirely. He left this in her chamber. The noble spits. Her, meaning the queen. The queen. Ooh, that's bad. Even you feel your stomach drop a little. The attendants freeze. The older woman closes her eyes, like she's praying for patience. Because they've seen this before, some variation of this drama has played out in every century. Every kingdom. A jealous noble. A suggestive clue. A ring where it shouldn't be. A conclusion that may or may not be true. Historians still argue whether royal adultery scandals were real or manufactured by politically ambitious rivals. Some say jealousy drove men to invent stories for personal gain. Others insist the royal bedrooms were, shall we say, livelier than chroniclers dared write. The truth? Usually somewhere in the foggy middle. The noble demands access to the queen's private rooms. The attendants step in front of him like a human barricade. That chamber is off limits, the older woman says firmly. He snarls, not when treason is involved. Treason. Just like that, he escalates the situation from jealousy to potential execution. In medieval Europe, accusing a queen of infidelity wasn't simply gossip. It was a claim that her children might not be legitimate heirs. And legacies, thrones, wars, those hung on legitimacy like a sword over the realm. Your skin prickles as the noble storms out, leaving the ring on the table like a ticking bomb. When the door closes, the attendants spring into motion. They hide the ring under a loose floorboard. They burn a letter. They whisper rapidly in overlapping murmurs. This isn't just damage control. This is survival. You drift toward the bed itself, a massive canopy structure with embroidered curtains. Underneath lies a secret drawer. You ease it open and find a vial of perfume from a foreign court, a small carved lion, a bundle of ribbon, tied twice, a single page of poetry, unsigned, and a folded handkerchief embroidered with initials. Not the queen's initials, not the king's either. Oh boy. One of the attendants quickly shuts the drawer, presses a finger to her lips, and murmurs, "Kings may reign, queens may smile, but she taps her own chest. We hold the truth of who visits in the night." You leave the chamber feeling the weight of it, that this room, more than any council hall or battlefield, shapes the fate of the kingdom. Scandals aren't born in public. They're born here, in soft sheets and whispered choices, in letters hidden behind tapestries, in lovers' tokens misplaced, and servants who witness too much. And as you step back into the hallway, you realize the truth medieval people knew all too well. A king's power may rule the land, but the secrets of the bedchamber rule the king. You leave the bedchamber behind, slipping once more into the dim corridors, but this time the atmosphere changes. Less perfume, more iron. The laughter and gossip fade, replaced by the cool bite of torch smoke and the low murmur of men who have spilled blood for a living. You're stepping into the world of a king beloved by bards and feared by enemies, a ruler sung as a warrior hero, though tonight you begin to understand the scandal he buried so deeply that even centuries later, historians still argue whether it truly happened. You emerge into a war room lit by a single lantern, its flame trembling like it's nervous to be here. At the center stands the warrior king, broad-shouldered, scarred, wearing a cloak that still smells faintly of horses and cold rain. He's hunched over a map, jaw clenched tight, every muscle in his body coiled with tension. He looks like someone sculpted from battlefield dust and stubborn pride, but you also sense something else: shame. Here's your mainstream historical fact for this section. Even the most celebrated warrior kings made secret, humiliating political bargains. Treaties they never wanted, payments they couldn't afford, promises made in desperation. Medieval chronicles often gloss over these, preferring heroic narratives. But the truth is that power came with moments of uncomfortable surrender. And tonight, you're watching one of those moments unfold. A messenger kneels before the king, holding a sealed parchment. The room goes still. Even the soldiers lining the walls, the ones who fought beside him, bled beside him, exchange uneasy glances. The king snatches the parchment and breaks the seal with more force than necessary. His eyes skim the words, and you see his expression flicker: anger, fear, humiliation, and then that brittle, crushing acceptance. He folds the parchment slowly, carefully, like someone trying not to break something fragile. "It is done," he murmurs. "Done." A single, terrible word. The generals shift uncomfortably, avoiding his gaze, because they know what "done" means. The king has agreed to a bargain that will stain his legacy. His kingdom has demanded a price he cannot pay without bending the knee to someone he hates. And the scandal? Oh, it's rich. The quirky tidbit: this king once publicly vowed he would never submit to foreign demands, even swearing it on a relic said to contain a saint's tooth. Apparently tonight he's chewing on his own words instead. He dismisses the messenger and waits until the door shuts before he speaks again. His voice is low, barely audible. They want hostages. Not nobles, not knights, not even gold. Children. Royal children, noble children, the sons of men, who fought beside him for years. Boys who barely learned to ride, now demanded as living collateral. You feel a chill crawl down your spine. One general slams his fist onto the table. "We cannot agree to this." "We have no choice," the king snaps. "Our forces are drained. The treasury is empty. Winter is coming. If we refuse, the enemy marches by spring." A soldier mutters something bitter under his breath. Another shuffles his feet, looking like he wants to punch the wall or the king. This is the moment every bard conveniently omits. The moment where bravery isn't enough, where honor cracks under political reality. Outside, you hear the faint echo of men shouting in the courtyard, celebrating a supposed victory, unaware that their king has just signed the most humiliating treaty of his reign. The king braces both hands on the table. His knuckles whiten. His breath comes shallow. He looks like a man who has fought 10,000 battles, but finally found the one he cannot win. Here's the scholarly debate requirement. Historians still argue whether this king ever actually agreed to hand over hostages, or whether his enemies fabricated the demand to smear his name. Some chroniclers claim the deal was struck in secret. Others insist it never happened. A few say the agreement was real, but the hostages were ransomed back before being delivered. And a small number, tantalizingly vague, write only, "The king suffered a great sorrow in those days," which, let's be honest, is medieval historian language for something scandalous definitely went down, but we're too scared to explain it. You watch as the king sinks onto a wooden bench, shoulders sagging. It's the first time you've seen him look small, vulnerable, human. He removes his sword belt and lays it aside, not ceremonially, not dramatically, but with the weary finality of someone who feels unworthy of carrying it tonight. A young page hesitates at the doorway, holding a fresh cloak. His voice trembles. "Your Majesty, the people await your word." The king forces a tight smile. Tell them peace has been secured. It's not a lie, but it isn't true either." He waits until the boy leaves, then whispers so quietly you almost miss it. "May God forgive me." You step back toward the shadows, watching him gather himself, smoothing his cloak, practicing a brave face he doesn't feel. This man will walk outside in moments and announce peace, and cheers will erupt across the courtyard. People will hail him as their hero. Mothers will bless his name, and none of them will know that he bought that peace not with victory, but with surrender. You drift away, leaving him alone in the fading lantern light, realizing that the worst scandals of kings aren't the ones splashed across history books, but the ones buried beneath hero stories, hidden beneath armor, wrapped in silence. You move deeper into the palace, leaving behind the war, room's iron weight, and stepping into a place that feels softer, stranger, almost unreal. The torches burn lower here, casting long shadows that seem to sway on their own. Incense lingers in the air, sweet, smoky, a little dizzying. You're not headed towards soldiers or statesmen anymore. You've wandered into the hidden world of a ruler whose power didn't rest on armies or alliances, but on something far more precarious: omens. You push aside a curtain embroidered with stars and moons and enter a chamber glowing with candlelight. At the center sits the king, this one slender, introspective, draped in dark robes, stitched with symbols he almost certainly doesn't fully understand. His crown is off, set gently beside a stack of charts and scrolls covered in looping diagrams. His fingers hover over them like a pianist unsure which note will save his life. He's waiting, not for news from the front, not for an ambassador, not for a noble council. He's waiting for his astrologer. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Many medieval kings consulted astrologers for major political decisions: wars, marriages, coronations, treaties, even travel schedules. Astrology wasn't fringe. It was respected science. If the stars said not today, then not today. Tonight, the stars are being consulted for something much more delicate. A candle flickers, and the king flinches. He glances at the window, where the moon hides behind drifting clouds. You can feel his anxiety like static in the air. This is a man ruled not just by cosmic charts, but by fear of making the wrong cosmic choice. The quirky tidbit? This king was known to change his entire daily routine based on which foot he placed on the floor first when getting out of bed. Left foot equals avoid discussions, right foot equals good for negotiations, both feet equals stay indoors, absolutely no signing decrees. Tonight, he's barefoot. You decide not to ask. Footsteps whisper behind you. The astrologer appears tall, robed in midnight blue, beard braided with tiny bronze rings. He carries a leather-bound star atlas and the confidence of someone who has convinced a king he can interpret the universe. The king rushes toward him. "Well?" he asks. "Is the omen favorable?" The astrologer clears his throat and unrolls a chart across the table. Symbols scatter like constellations across the parchment: arrows, planets, cryptic notes. He points to one particular arrangement. "Your Majesty," he says softly, "Mars is in the house of opposition. You must delay your announcement." The king's shoulders sag, relief flooding his face. "I knew it. I felt it in my bones." You suppress a sigh, or a laugh. Hard to decide. The ruler gestures for you to sit beside him, as if you're part of this cosmic meeting, so you lean in as the astrologer continues. "The nobles will resist your new tax. If announced tonight, it will spark rebellion. But if you wait until the moon enters its waxing phase," he taps a spot on the chart, "they will bend to your will." The king nods slowly. Yes, that makes sense. Does it? Not really, but he believes it, and that's enough. Here's your scholarly debate requirement. Historians still argue whether medieval rulers genuinely believed in astrology or simply used it as political cover, an excuse to delay unpopular decisions. Some kings leaned deeply and sincerely into cosmic advice. Others used astrologers as buffers, allowing them to blame the stars for choices they'd already made. This king? Oh, he believes. A little too much. A breeze pushes through the window, rattling the hanging charms, tiny metal crescents that tinkle like anxious wind chimes. The king tenses as two fall to the ground, clattering. "What does that mean?" he whispers. The astrologer crouches, examining the charms with exaggerated seriousness. He turns one over, frowns, and finally announces, "It means caution." The king gasps softly like he's just received a divine revelation. Meanwhile, the astrologer shoots you a look that says, "Do not ruin this for me." You nod. "Respect the hustle." A messenger bursts into the room, breathless. "Your Majesty, the council demands your presence." They expect your decree on the tax. The king freezes. His eyes dart to the astrologer. Am I allowed to go? Allowed. By the stars. To a political meeting. The astrologer sighs dramatically. Go, but say nothing final. Not until the stars realign. The king nods and slips on a ring shaped like a crescent moon, his luck ring. You've noticed he rotates it 3 times clockwise before addressing any audience. Tonight, he spins it 4 times. The astrologer's eyebrow twitches, but he wisely stays silent. You follow the king down the corridor toward the council hall. He keeps muttering under his breath. Waxing phase. Favorable signs. Avoid harsh words. Let the heavens speak. You almost bump into him when he stops abruptly at a pillar. Is this, he whispers, a good sign? He gestures to a small carving of a lion on the wall. It's just a lion, you want to say. But before you can, the astrologer, who has followed, steps forward smoothly. It is a sign of strength, Majesty. The king beams. Of course, strength. Excellent. When he enters the council chamber, the nobles rise, expecting decisive leadership. Instead, they watch him smile gently, speak vaguely, and postpone everything with celestial excuses. Tonight, he announces, is not auspicious. The nobles groan in unison. You can almost hear the scandal brewing. A king who governs not through strategy, not through logic, but through moon phases, random charms, and an overworked astrologer who's making up half of this as he goes. And yet, somehow, the kingdom doesn't fall apart. Not tonight, not yet. Maybe it's luck, maybe it's superstition, maybe it's the power of belief itself, fragile and ridiculous and strangely effective. Because in this court, the stars don't just guide the king, they rule him. You drift away from the astrologer's incense-soaked chamber and feel the palace's mood shift again. The air grows heavier, thicker, almost metallic. You're entering a place where power doesn't come from prophecy or romance or battlefield glory, but from money. Cold, jangling, uncomfortable money. Because tonight, you step into the world of a king whose entire reign, despite the pomp, despite the jewels, despite the ceremonies, was built on a humiliating truth. He was drowning in debt. You slip into a long hall lined with tapestries that boast of royal prosperity. Banquets, hunts, festivals, triumphant processions. They show abundance, luxury, overflowing cornucopias, because the palace wants everyone to believe that the king is rich, rich, endlessly rich. But as you move past a guard and into a smaller, locked chamber, the illusion shatters instantly. You're now standing in the royal treasury, and it is embarrassingly empty. A few chests sit open, revealing nothing but dust and a sad scattering of copper coins. Account books lie stacked on a table, pages covered in frantic handwriting, crossed out sums, and notes like postpone payment and borrow against harvest. A steward stands hunched over the ledgers, muttering numbers under his breath, sweating in a room that isn't even warm. Beside him, an accountant scratches quill marks like he's trying to write the debt away through sheer willpower. And at the center of this chaos stands the king dressed lavishly, looking proud and regal, but with a faint tremor in his hand that gives him away. His crown may glitter, but his finances, they're on life support. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Many medieval kings lived permanently in debt, often owing money to nobles, merchants, foreign bankers, and even monasteries. Crowning a king didn't magically refill the treasury. In fact, coronations were expensive. Wars drained funds like leaky buckets. Royal weddings, tournaments, feasts, they all cost fortunes, and rulers rarely, if ever, cut back on luxury. Image mattered too much. This king, however, has outdone himself. The quirky tidbit, he once borrowed so much money to host a single tournament that he actually pawned half the royal crown jewels to pay for the decorations. The decorations. Not the horses, not the armor, not the prizes, the bunting. Tonight, his debts have caught up with him. A nervous knock echoes through the treasury. The steward pales. The king straightens his cloak, putting on a calm smile he definitely hasn't earned. 3 men enter, but these aren't nobles. They aren't diplomats. They aren't even priests. They're creditors. One is a wealthy merchant from a port city, wearing rings on every finger. Another is a banker with icy eyes and a writing desk portable enough to ruin someone on the go. The third is a noble who looks far too pleased to be here because lending money to a desperate king is the medieval equivalent of winning a cheat code for influence. They bow, but only barely. Not disrespectful, but not deferential either. A silent reminder. They don't fear him. Not tonight. The merchant clears his throat. Your Majesty, we have come to collect on the overdue loan. The king waves a hand dismissively. Merely delayed. Funds will arrive any day. The merchant raises an eyebrow. From where? The king's smile tightens. His steward steps in, trembling. We are anticipating revenue from the spring market. The banker flips open a ledger. Spring has passed. Silence descends. Awkward, suffocating silence. The noble creditor steps forward with a smirk. Perhaps you would prefer to renegotiate the terms. We can be flexible. Ah, yes, flexible. And here lies the scandal. Because flexibility means influence. Influence means power. And power means that the king, this glittering monarch, might soon be taking orders from the very men standing before him. Historians still argue whether this king essentially sold portions of his authority to pay off his debts. Some records suggest he granted special trading privileges, tax exemptions, or even political appointments in exchange for cash. Others claim he secretly ceded control of royal lands. And then there are the chroniclers who delicately note that the king's judgment in financial matters was unwise. That's medieval speak for this man was financially incompetent. The banker closes the ledger with a soft thud that feels like a death sentence. We require collateral, he says. The king stiffens. You have my word. We need more than your word, the banker replies coolly. We need access. Access to what? The treasury, the customs ports, the mint, perhaps. The steward actually chokes. The king's eyes flash with anger, real, sharp anger, but beneath it, you see fear creeping in like frost. He knows they're right. He knows he's cornered. Slowly, painfully, he nods. And just like that, royal authority slips into someone else's hands. The creditors bow again lower this time, but not out of respect. Out of satisfaction. They leave with smug smiles, carrying documents that essentially make them shadow rulers. When the door closes, the king finally exhales. His shoulders collapse. For a moment, he looks every bit the tired, overextended, debt-ridden man he is beneath the velvet and jewels. The steward whispers, Majesty, what shall we do? The king rubs his temples. Find money. Anywhere. Raise taxes. Borrow more. Melt something if you must. Melt something. The gold candlesticks. The silver goblets. The ceremonial chalice. Anything. You leave the treasury as the king sinks into a chair, surrounded by empty chests, worthless promises, and the crushing realization that for all his pomp and ceremony, the realm no longer answers solely to him. Not tonight. Not while creditors hold the keys to his kingdom. You leave the treasury's suffocating tension behind and slip into another wing of the palace, one colder, more fortified, where the walls seem thicker not just in stone, but in paranoia. The atmosphere grows heavier as you approach a grand hall lined with suits of armor and painted shields. The metal glints under torchlight like watchful eyes. This is the domain of the king's knights, sworn protectors, masters of war, paragons of loyalty. Or at least, that's what the ballads claim. Tonight, though, you're about to learn the uncomfortable truth. This king is absolutely terrified of his own knights. You step quietly into a chamber where the king sits alone at a long table, fingers drumming nervously. Around him, the chairs meant for his most elite warriors remain empty for now. His crown lies askew, as if he's been pulling at it without realizing. He keeps glancing toward the door, flinching at every noise in the hallway. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Medieval, kings depended on powerful knights and nobles to enforce their rule, but those same men often had armies of their own and could overthrow a king if they felt threatened or underpaid. So in many kingdoms, the king wasn't at the top of the hierarchy. He was balancing on a very wobbly pyramid. Tonight's king knows this a little too well. A herald announces the incoming knights, and the king stiffens like someone bracing for a dentist's drill. The great wooden doors open, and in stride 6 armored figures, tall as giants in this flickering light. Their boots thud on the stone like war drums. Their faces are unreadable, hidden partly by shadows and partly by the absolute confidence of men who know they are indispensable. The king stands, smiling too brightly, too quickly, like a man trying to charm a pack of wolves. "Welcome, my loyal friends," he says, voice thin. Friends. That word has never sounded so fragile. The knights bow, though not deeply. One removes his gauntlets, with deliberate slowness, placing them on the table in a way that feels symbolic. The king's eyes flicker to them, then immediately away. You take a seat in the corner, watching the tension swirl. The captain of the knights, a scarred, imposing man, clears his throat. "Majesty, we must discuss the matter of our wages." "Ah, there it is." The king's smile tightens but does not break. "Certainly. I was just about to address—" "We have not been paid in 6 months." The captain interrupts. The king swallows. The steward, standing behind him, begins sweating violently. The captain continues, voice low but purposeful. "My men have marched for you, bled for you, lost brothers for you, but they cannot eat honor. They cannot drink promises." The king tries to regain control. "You must understand, funds have been delayed." "We understand perfectly," the captain replies. "And so do the men. You can feel it now. The king isn't afraid of individual knights. He's afraid of what knights become when they're angry. Armed, organized, loyal only to one another, and numerous enough to change the ruler. The quirky tidbit? This king once built a new private garden wall purely because he heard 2 knights laughing outside and became convinced they were plotting against him. They were actually laughing about a goose that stole someone's shoe. But paranoia doesn't need logic. The knights exchange glances, a silent conversation passing through them like lightning. The king clears his throat. "I will, of course, pay you soon. I simply need Majesty," the captain says, stepping closer. "We require assurance." The king freezes. "Assurance?" "A gesture," the captain says. "A sign of your commitment to us." Historians still argue about what gesture this king was forced to give. Some chroniclers suggest he surrendered part of the royal armory. Others say he granted the knights land rights. A few claim he even allowed them to form a council that could overrule his battlefield decisions. And then there's the scandalous version, the one whispered, not written, that he was asked to hand over a hostage from his own family until the debts were paid. You can almost taste the fear in the air as the captain's shadow falls across the king. A squire rushes in suddenly, breathless. "Majesty, a disturbance in the courtyard." Everyone tenses. "What kind of disturbance?" the captain asks sharply. The squire swallows. "The men are gathering. They say tonight is the night they will no longer be ignored." You hear the murmur now, shouting outside, steel clashing against shields, men chanting demands. The walls vibrate faintly with the rhythm of boots stomping in unison. A riot? A protest? The beginnings of a mutiny? The king's face drains of color. The captain turns slowly toward him. "Majesty, you see why we require assurance." The king opens his mouth, shuts it, opens it, again like a panicked fish. Finally, he nods. "Yes, you shall have what you ask." The captain bows again, much deeper this time. Equilibrium restored. For now. You follow the king as he leaves the chamber, walking toward a balcony overlooking the courtyard. He forces his expression into something regal before stepping outside. Below, dozens, maybe hundreds of armed men look up at him, their armor glittering in the torchlight. They are chanting a single word: wages, wages, wages. The king raises a trembling hand. "My loyal knights, your patience is not unnoticed. I hear you, I see you, and I promise your service will be honored." Some men cheer, some don't. Some look like they're deciding whether this man deserves to keep his crown. As the king retreats inside, you see him exhale shakily. He whispers to himself, "I must keep them loyal, no matter the cost." It's then you understand the truth. A medieval king might wear the crown, but the knights, the ones with swords, armies, and bruised pride, they're the ones who can take it away. And this king? He goes to sleep every night wondering if tomorrow morning They will. You leave the echoing chants of the nights behind and slip down a narrower passage, one that leads away from steel and violence and towards something quieter but no less dangerous. The torches burn lower here, their light swallowed by stone. You feel the shift immediately. This corridor smells of ink, dust, and anxiety. The kind of place where secrets don't shout, they whisper. You're heading toward the royal treasury offices, not the public hall where gold is displayed for ceremony, but the hidden counting rooms where numbers decide the fate of kingdoms. Because tonight, you're about to witness one of the most common and most quietly catastrophic scandals medieval kings tried desperately to bury. Financial corruption. You push open a heavy oak door and step inside. The room is cramped, lit by only 2 candles guttering under the weight of melted wax. Scrolls lie everywhere, stacked in towers, scattered on tables, shoved into baskets. The clerks look up as you enter, their quills freezing mid-stroke like guilty children caught stealing sweets. But the one you're here to see sits in the far corner. The king. Yes, this king. Not a steward, not a chamberlain, not an accountant. The king himself, hunched over a ledger, with his brow furrowed so deeply it could hide a family of mice. Tonight's scandal is too big, too dangerous, too embarrassing to delegate. The king slams the ledger shut when he sees you, but too late you caught a glimpse. Entire rows crossed out, pages missing, sums that absolutely do not sum. A line that simply reads, unaccounted expenses. Unaccounted, a word that hides more sins than any dungeon ever could. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Medieval treasuries were notoriously chaotic, vulnerable to embezzlement, fraud, and creative accounting. Kings relied on clerks, and clerks relied on opportunity. Money vanished constantly, sometimes because of incompetence, sometimes because of greed, and sometimes because a king quietly redirected funds into his own side projects. Tonight, your king is discovering a hole in the treasury that could swallow his entire reign. A clerk clears his throat and whispers, "Majesty, the numbers don't match." The king snaps, "Obviously they don't match. I can see they don't match." The clerk flinches. Another clerk pretends to faint behind a stack of parchments. Understandable. The king grabs a different ledger. Older, dustier, stained with something suspiciously wine-colored. He flips through the pages with growing horror. "Where is the revenue from the port tariffs?" he demands. Silence. The steward shifts uncomfortably. "Well, some of it went to repairs." Pause. "And the rest?" The steward coughs. "Possibly to gifts." "Gifts? What? Gifts?" "Diplomatic gifts, sire. Tokens of goodwill, ceremonial offerings, bribes, pardon, incentives." The king's jaw tightens. "How many incentives exactly?" The steward opens his mouth, closes it again, opens it. Useless. One clerk chimes in reluctantly. 37, Your Majesty." Another corrects. 42. A third mutters. 56. The king's eye twitches. "And the payments from the wine merchants?" he asks. "Missing, sire. Missing?" "Yes. They haven't arrived." "Why not?" The clerk stammers. "Because someone waived the taxes for them." The king's voice drops to a deadly whisper. "Who?" Shuffling, staring at the floor, sudden fascination with ceiling cobwebs. Finally, one clerk admits, "You did, Majesty." "Oh, oh." A beat of silence follows, long, painful, magnificent. You can practically see the king's soul leave his body for a moment. He whispers, "That was supposed to be temporary. It was 18 months ago, sire." The king slumps back in his chair like a man questioning every decision he has ever made, up to and including being born. And now comes the quirky tidbit. Some medieval kings performed literal treasure hunts for lost gold, turning over flagstones, searching walls, even digging in gardens because they were convinced the money must be somewhere. This king? Oh, yes, he's one of those. He stands abruptly. "Check the vault walls." The clerks blink. "The walls?" "Yes. Tap them. All of them. There must be secret compartments." One clerk hesitates. "Majesty, we've tapped them 5 times this month." "Then tap again." They tap, and tap, and tap. The king leans close to the wall, pressing his ear to the stone as if expecting it to confess under pressure. It does not. With every failed tap, he grows more frantic until he finally snaps. Enough! Someone has stolen from me. Historians still argue whether this king was truly robbed or simply the victim of terrible bookkeeping. Some chroniclers blame corrupt clerks. Others blame the king himself for spending wildly. A few suggest the missing gold was funneled to foreign mercenaries or secret lovers. And at least one account claims the money was used to build an enormous and failed mechanical fountain shaped like a lion. Was that true? No one knows. But it feels true. Suddenly, a timid clerk holds up another ledger. Majesty, I found an entry. For the missing funds. The king's breath catches. Hope. Actual hope. He snatches the ledger and reads the line. Expenses for royal entertainment. 9,000 silver pieces. He freezes. Entertainment? He flips the page. Musicians. Assorted. Exotic birds. Escaped. Fire eater. Inured. Acrobat troupe. Never arrived. He groans. Long and low. Because this is the scandal. He authorized these expenses. All of them. On a night he couldn't sleep and wanted a distraction. He slams the ledger shut again and whispers, "No one must ever know about this. Too late. You know. The clerks know. The steward knows. And the treasury walls, cold, ancient, and profoundly judgmental, definitely know." You leave the counting room as the king buries his face in his hands, surrounded by empty chests and piles of parchment that testify to the quiet, devastating truth. Not every medieval scandal was about lust or war. Some were about numbers. Ugly, disappearing, impossible numbers. And this king? He may survive battles, but the missing silver might very well destroy him. You slip out of the counting rooms, leaving behind the frantic quills, the missing silver, and the king's whispered despair, and follow a narrow staircase spiraling upward. The steps creak beneath your boots, dust drifting off stone like ancient breath. The air grows colder, not with danger, but with grief. A grief so old it feels baked into the walls. You're heading toward one of the great royal mysteries, an event that medieval Europe whispered about for centuries. Tonight, you walk into a quiet corridor lined with faded portraits. Kings, queens, noble heirs. But one space is empty, a blank frame, deliberately left vacant. No paint, no carving, no inscription. Just absence. Because this section belongs to the scandal the palace never recovered from. A king's vanishing heir. You step into the prince's chamber. The door groans open, revealing a room left exactly as it was on the night he disappeared. Dust lies thick on the bedposts. A lute leans against a chair. One string snapped like it died mid-song. A tapestry hangs crooked, as if someone brushed against it in frantic haste. A toy knight lies on the floor. Books sit open on a desk, pages curled by time. It feels wrong. Too still. Like the room is holding its breath. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Several medieval royal heirs vanished mysteriously, some kidnapped, some possibly murdered, some perhaps hidden away or smuggled to safety. The most famous cases still fuel debate. A prince disappearing in the night, a child lost in a tower, an heir whisked from his tutors and never seen again. Tonight's king suffers the same terrible anguish. You hear footsteps behind you, soft, dragging. The king enters the room alone. No guards, no counselors, no pages, just him. And sorrow. His face looks older in this dimness, carved with lines you didn't see before. He walks slowly toward the bed, brushing his hand across the blankets, as if hoping they might warm beneath his touch. They don't. He was just here, the king murmurs, though the absence stretches back months. He was just here. But the room doesn't answer. It never does. The king turns to a small writing desk. Papers lie scattered, half-finished lessons, sketches of horses, a poem scratched out and rewritten 6 times. You pick up a crumpled page. Father says a prince must be brave. The rest is smudged. You set it down gently. The quirky tidbit, This prince was said to sleep with a wooden dragon tucked under his pillow for protection, carved for him by a wandering craftsman. You find it now, beneath the bed, its tiny wings chipped, a child's treasure, lost in the chaos of a night no one dares describe. The king kneels, holding the toy like a relic. His voice trembles. They said he wandered off. They said he climbed out the window. They said he was lured away. He presses his eyes shut. They said too many things. And here comes the required scholarly debate. Historians still argue whether the missing heir was kidnapped, murdered, smuggled out by political rivals, or hidden deliberately to protect him from palace intrigue. Some claim the boy lived out his life in anonymity. Others insist he died the night he vanished. A few maintain that the king himself helped conceal him. And then there are the chroniclers who simply write, "The prince was gone, and no more was said." The king stands abruptly, pacing the room. The nobles accuse each other, he mutters. The church claims it was divine punishment. My advisors insist the boy was taken by enemies. And he swallows hard, I do not know who to believe. His hands tremble so violently he grabs the bedpost to steady himself. A guard arrives at the doorway, helmet in hand. Majesty, they found something. The king straightens instantly, hope flaring in his eyes like a struck spark. Where? In the northern woods, the guard says. A boot, child-sized. The king closes his eyes. Is it his? We cannot be certain. You feel the emotional blow hit him like a hammer. Hope and dread tangled so tightly they cut like wire. He gestures for you to follow, and together you descend the stairs, moving quickly through the corridors until you reach a quiet courtyard. A small bundle lies on a table wrapped in cloth. The king's breath catches as he reaches for it. You brace yourself for the worst. But when he unfolds the cloth, a sigh of relief leaves him shaky, but real. It's not the prince's boot. It belongs to another child entirely. The king sinks onto a bench, pressing his palms to his forehead. Every time, he whispers, every time they bring me something, it is never him. You sit with him in the silence that follows. The courtyard feels impossibly still, as if the whole palace is waiting for a miracle that never arrives. A breeze shifts through the trees, scattering leaves across the stones. The king watches them drift, his voice soft. Do you know what they call this? He asks. A tragedy, a mystery, a cautionary tale. He looks toward the empty window of the prince's chamber. But none of them call it what it is. He swallows. A father's punishment. He stands slowly, gathering himself, pulling the mask of kingship back over his grief. The shoulders straighten, the voice steadies, the eyes harden. Because a king cannot mourn in public. Mourning invites questions. Questions invite rebellion. He turns to leave, whispering, If he lives, I hope he is safe. And if he doesn't? The king doesn't speak the second half of that sentence. He doesn't have to. You watch him walk away through the archway, his cloak trailing behind him like a shadow of the child he has lost. The scandal that haunts this kingdom isn't a crime proven, but a truth never found. You leave the prince's empty chamber behind, your footsteps echoing down a hallway that feels colder, now like the stones themselves carry the memory of loss. But as you move deeper into the heart of the palace, the chill shifts into something sharper, to more dangerous. Because tonight, you're stepping into the realm of a king whose greatest scandal isn't debt, or omens, or tragic disappearance. It's the simple, suffocating truth that everyone around him wants him dead. You push open a heavy door and enter the council chamber wide, polished, and echoing with uneasy murmurs. Torches burn low along the walls. The air tastes thick, metallic, like the room is waiting for something terrible to happen. At the far end of the table sits the king. He looks composed at first glance, posture straight, hands folded, expression firm. But when you step closer, you notice the strain around his eyes, the way he keeps glancing at each counselor a second too long, like he's trying to figure out who will betray him first. Because he knows. He absolutely knows. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Many medieval kings lived surrounded by enemies, nobles with private armies, royal relatives with competing claims, churchmen with political motives, and foreign spies with tempting bribes. It wasn't paranoia, it was Tuesday. Tonight, this king faces all of them at once. A bishop clears his throat. Majesty, we must discuss the Southern Lord's refusal to send troops. A noble woman leans forward. And the grain shipments being rerouted. Another noble, this one smirking, adds, and the rumours. Of course. Rumours. That word in a medieval court is never harmless. You ease into a shadowed corner as the king lifts his chin, steel in his gaze. Which rumours? Silence. Then the noble smirks wider. That your majesty intends to seize certain estates. The king's jaw tightens. I intend no such thing. Ah, the noble says softly. That is unfortunate, because the lords already believe you do. You watch the realization sink into the body. King. Not because the rumor is true, but because it doesn't need to be true to ignite rebellion. A quill scratches suddenly at the end of the table. A scribe is taking notes without looking up, eyes trained on parchment, ears wide open. A dangerous combination. Then comes the quirky tidbit. This king once tried to outlaw gossip by making suspicious whispering punishable with a fine of 12 chickens. 12. People avoided whispering for about 4 days, then went right back to it. Tonight's whispers, however, are anything but petty. A councillor leans in. Majesty, there are letters. He slides one across the table. The king doesn't touch it, but you do. It's coded, but not coded enough. Someone is gathering support to depose him. The room goes still. Even the torches seem to hold their breath. The king lifts the letter between 2 fingers like it's a poisonous snake. Is this confirmed? The bishop nods. We fear so. And the conspirators? Another councillor whispers. In this very room. You feel the tension snap tight like a drawn bowstring. Hands drift toward dagger hilts. Eyes narrow. Chairs scrape softly against stone. Historians still argue whether this king was truly surrounded by traitors, or whether he created his own enemies through distrust. Some chroniclers insist he uncovered a genuine conspiracy involving half the nobility. Others claim he became so paranoid that he accused even his most loyal allies. And a few suggest a mix real threats tangled with imagined ones. Tonight, the threat feels real enough. The king stands abruptly, slamming both hands on the table. If any among you intends to betray me, speak now. No one moves, no one breathes. He steps closer to his advisors, eyes sweeping across each face. You dine with me. You pray with me. You swear loyalty. Yet my messengers vanish. My orders are delayed, and my armies receive no support. He points at the letter. Someone in this room is lying. The noblewoman folds her hands calmly. Majesty, perhaps you should rest. You've seemed strained. Ah, there it is. The subtlest, deadliest accusation in a medieval court. Is the king mentally unfit to rule? You feel the temperature of the room drop. The king straightens, voice cold as winter steel. You will not question my mind. Then allow us, the bishop says softly, to help you. Help. With nobles, that word often means replace. The king's hand hovers near his belt, not for a weapon, but for a small charm, a token from his mother, for luck, for courage, for moments when everyone in the room might be plotting your downfall. You watch him breathe deeply, recalibrating, reclaiming his authority like a man pulling himself out of quicksand. He says, I will not be cornered. He says, I will not be pushed. He says, and I will not fall. But fear ripples beneath each word like a hidden current. Suddenly a guard bursts through the door, panting. Majesty, a messenger caught leaving the palace. He carried this. He holds out another letter. The king takes it, reads, and his entire face changes. Because this letter isn't coded. It's not subtle. It's not whispered. It says plainly, the crown will fall. Prepare yourself. His council erupts into shouting accusations, denials, threats, prayers, chaos, absolute, suffocating chaos. But the king, he goes silent, completely still. You can see the moment he realizes the truth. He is surrounded by enemies, and he has no idea which ones intend to strike. You step back as the noise swells, the chamber collapsing into a storm of fear and ambition. The king grips the edge of the table, knuckles white, eyes sharp with a terror he cannot show. He whispers to himself so soft you barely catch it. I must survive them all. Because some kings are brought down by battles, some by scandals, some by debts. But this king, his downfall, if it comes, will be crafted by the people dining at his table, praying in his chapel, advising his decisions, the people closest to him, the people he cannot escape. You leave the council chamber behind, letting its accusations and sharpened whispers fade into the distance. But the tension doesn't disappear, it lingers in the air like the scent of smoke after a fire. You follow a narrow side passage, one used mostly by servants and people who don't want to be seen. The torches here burn lower, casting long skeletal shadows across the walls, and tonight, those shadows lead you somewhere far more unnerving. The Royal Medical Quarters. A place filled not with swords, but scalpels, not with warriors, but physicians, not with obvious danger, but subtle, creeping influence. You enter a small chamber lit by floating dust motes and the wavering glow of oil lamps. Shelves sag under the weight of glass vials, dried herbs, strange powders, and rolled-up medical diagrams depicting bodies in unsettling detail. And at the center of it all stands the king. Shirt open, face pale, waiting to be examined. Because tonight's scandal is not about power taken by violence. It's about power taken through medicine. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Medieval royal physicians wielded enormous influence, diagnosing kings, prescribing treatments, and shaping policies based on their medical authority. Their words could delay a coronation, halt a war, or excuse a king from council. Some were brilliant, some were frauds, many were both. Tonight, you're not entirely sure which kind you're dealing with. A physician approaches the king, carrying a silver bowl filled with steaming liquid. His clothes are stained with herbs. His eyes gleam with a mixture of confidence and something else, something calculating. "Majesty," the physician says, "you're fevered again." The king lifts an eyebrow. "I do not feel fevered. That is precisely what concerns me." The Resi, king hesitates. And just like that, the physician gains ground. You move closer, noticing a second man in the corner. This one, clearly not a doctor, dressed in plain robes, muttering prayers over a string of beads, a spiritual healer, a rival, one the physician glares at with professional hatred. Ah, perfect. Tonight's tension isn't between king and physician, it's between physician and physician, each vying for control of the royal body and, by extension, the royal decisions. The quirky tidbit: one of these physicians once attempted to treat the king's headaches by applying leeches to his temples and reciting a poem about moonlight. He swore it helped. The king swore it made him see double for a week. The room grows quiet as the primary physician places the steaming bowl under the king's nose. "Breathe deeply, Majesty." The king obeys, and nearly chokes. The scent punches the air, sharp, bitter, like burning onions mixed with vinegar and regret. "What is that?" The king coughs. "A restorative vaporizer made from goat bile and crushed cardamom." You fight the urge to gag. The physician adds, "It will sharpen your mind." The spiritual healer snorts. "It will rot his lungs." The physician wheels on him. "At least I use science." The healer snaps back. "Your science nearly killed him last winter." The king lifts a weary hand. "Enough." But they don't stop. The argument escalates: medicine versus mysticism, herbs versus prayers, theory versus intuition. The king rubs his temples. "This is giving me a headache." The healer bows. "I can fix that." The physician growls. "No, I will fix that." Historians still argue whether these two practitioners were genuinely trying to help the king or simply trying to outmaneuver each other for power. Some chroniclers claim the court physicians formed secret alliances with nobles. Others suggest they deliberately exaggerated royal illnesses to control political timing. A few whisper that some kings were slowly poisoned, not to kill them, but to keep them dependent. You watch as the physician prepares another concoction, this one thick and green, simmering ominously in a pot. The king eyes it warily. "Is that safe?" The physician beams. "Absolutely," the healer mutters. "He said the same about the leeches." The king groans. "Please, no more leeches." But the physician presses forward. "Majesty, drink this." The king takes the cup reluctantly and pauses. Because he sees it too, the way the healer tenses, the way the physician leans in eagerly, the way the guards shift uncomfortably. He's not sure whom to trust. Not with his health, not with his kingdom. You watch him lower the cup. "What is in this?" he asks. The physician rattles off ingredients rapidly, most of which sound like they belong in a kitchen, a garden, or a witch's pantry. The healer interrupts after the third herb. That mixture will inflame his nerves. It will calm his nerves. It will weaken his heart. It will strengthen his constitution. At this point, even the king looks like he's considering throwing both men out the nearest window. A guard suddenly enters, bowing. "Majesty, a messenger from the northern lords requests an audience." The king seizes the opportunity. "Tell him I am unwell." He gestures vaguely at the physicians. "Too many medical interventions." The guard nods knowingly and leaves. The king sighs in relief, because he just used the scandal of his overbearing physicians to dodge a political threat. You realize something important in that moment. The king may be surrounded by power-hungry healers, but he's also learned how to weaponize their influence for his own survival. He turns to the two men. "I will take neither potion nor prayer tonight." His voice becomes firm. "I will rest. Alone." The physicians freeze. "But Majesty, no, you must. No, you cannot simply N.O." They fall silent. And as they shuffle out grudgingly, glaring at each other, you see the king relax for the first time tonight. He closes his eyes, inhales deeply, and whispers, "At least enemies with swords are honest." You leave the room with him sitting alone, bathed in lamplight, realizing the truth that medieval kings knew all too well. Sometimes the greatest danger doesn't come from armies or assassins, but from the people who swear they're saving you. You leave the heavy scent of herbs and steaming concoctions behind, stepping into a quieter hallway where the torches burn low and the air cools as if the stones themselves are holding their breath. You follow a passage that curves subtly, leading you toward the oldest part of the palace where the walls are thick, the windows narrow, and the silence feels watched. Something here is different. Not dangerous, exactly, but forbidden, secretive, weighted. Because tonight, you enter the private sanctuary of a king, hiding a scandal so devastating that, if exposed, it could topple his throne without a single sword drawn. He is torn between two faiths. You step into a dim chapel tucked behind a hidden door. A single lamp flickers on the altar. Religious scrolls lie open on the table, some approved by the church, others absolutely not. And kneeling before the altar is the king, shoulders slumped, hands clasped, not in confident piety but in trembling confusion. He hears you enter but doesn't turn. He simply whispers, "I must choose, and I cannot." Here's your mainstream historical fact. Medieval rulers were required to uphold the dominant religion of their realm. A king with dubious or secret spiritual sympathies risked rebellion, excommunication, civil war, or foreign invasion. Faith wasn't just personal, it was political oxygen. Tonight's king is suffocating. You approach slowly. The altar holds two relics placed side by side. One, a blessed emblem of the kingdom's official religion. The other, a symbol belonging to a reformist or outlawed sect, whispered about in dark corners, condemned from pulpits, yet quietly spreading through villages. And the scandal? The king feels drawn to the forbidden one. Not out of rebellion, not out of ambition, not even out of romantic curiosity, out of belief. He presses a hand to his forehead. "If I renounce it, I betray my soul." He moves his hand to the official relic. "If I embrace it, I betray my kingdom." A terrible, impossible choice, and he must make it alone. You watch as he stands and moves to a bookshelf, pulling down a small journal bound in deep red leather. He opens it, and the pages are filled with his handwriting, covering months of spiritual doubt, theological debate, and deeply personal confessions. Questions he can never ask in public, fears he can never acknowledge, hopes he can never speak aloud. The quirky tidbit? This king once disguised himself as an ordinary pilgrim and visited a remote shrine of the forbidden sect unrecognized by everyone except a small child who asked why he had such kingly shoes. The king panicked so hard he walked 12 miles home barefoot just in case. He sets the journal down, rubbing his temples. My advisors must never know. My bishops must never guess. And if the nobles even suspect, they will say God has withdrawn his blessing from my reign. You hear it then, the creak of a floorboard. The king's head snaps up. A figure stands in the doorway. A servant, young, soft-spoken, loyal, but pale with fear. Majesty, he whispers. I did not mean to intrude. The king steps forward urgently. You saw nothing. The servant nods so fast he nearly loses balance. Nothing at all, sire. Truly. I am blind, spiritually blind, emotionally blind, blind in every way that matters. The king almost smiles. Almost. But the servant hesitates at the threshold, swallowing hard. There are whispers. In the kitchen, he murmurs. That you've been reading the wrong texts. The king freezes. And the bishop, the servant glances nervously over his shoulder, has asked questions about your absences during morning prayer. The servant flees, leaving the king rigid with dread, because here comes the scholarly debate requirement. Historians still argue whether this king truly converted, merely explored alternative faiths, or simply used religious ambiguity as political leverage. Some accounts say he secretly supported reform. Others claim he flirted with heresy but never crossed the line. A few suggest he was trying to unite factions through spiritual compromise. And one chronicle, written decades later, insists he burned every text from the forbidden sect on his deathbed. You look back at the king. He's shaking. Not with fear of God, with fear of people. He moves to the small window slit and stares out at the courtyard below where soldiers sharpen swords, priests bless travelers, and nobles laugh under the archways. My people trust me, he whispers. They believe I am steadfast. He presses a hand to the window's cold stone. But how can a man be steadfast when his soul moves like water? He turns to the forbidden text on the altar, fingers grazing the cover. His voice breaks. What if they never forgive me for this? Another creak echoes, this one heavier. You whirl around as the bishop steps into the doorway, dressed in full ceremonial robes, his expression unreadable. The king stiffens. Majesty, the bishop says quietly, we must speak. The king closes his eyes, breath shaking. This isn't a conversation he can win. Not with his crown, not with his life, not with his soul. The bishop steps forward, gaze drifting to the two relics on the altar. I fear the court has concerns. The king steadies himself. Concerns? That you are conflicted, the bishop says gently. The king swallows. I am allowed doubt. Not, the bishop replies, when the stability of the kingdom depends on your certainty. The king's hands tremble at his sides. You stand between them, feeling the weight of centuries press in the danger, the secrecy, the quiet desperation of a monarch caught between faith and throne. Because some medieval kings lost their crowns through war. Some lost them through scandal. Some lost them through betrayal. But this one? He risks losing his simply by believing the wrong thing. You slip out of the secret chapel just as the bishop's quiet, dangerous voice fades behind you. The corridors feel tighter, now narrower, darker, as if the castle itself knows you're carrying something fragile and forbidden. But as you turn a corner, the stillness breaks. You hear laughter, soft, breathy, intimate, and the faint scrape of a door closing quickly. Ah, you've stepped straight into the next scandal. A scandal not of faith, or coins, or vanished heirs, but of love, power, and a dangerous, inevitable triangle. You follow the sound down a hallway lined with tapestries depicting saints and battles ironic, given what's happening behind one of these doors. You slow your pace near a side chamber, its door slightly ajar. Candlelight spills out in a warm flicker, along with hushed whispers that do not belong in a royal palace. Inside, you see her, the queen, graceful, intelligent, lonely in the way only royal women can be. She sits on a cushioned bench, twisting a ring around her finger. And kneeling before her, not in worship, but in worry, is the king's closest friend and most trusted advisor. Oh no. Oh yes. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Emotional entanglements between queens and powerful courtiers were far more common than official chronicles ever admitted. Sometimes they were truly romantic. Sometimes they were strategic. Sometimes they were nothing more than deep companionship. But in politics, perception is everything. Tonight, perception is about to explode. The advisor whispers, "You shouldn't have summoned me here. It isn't safe." The Queen's voice trembles. "I had to. He's changed." The advisor tenses. "The King?" She nods. "He barely speaks to me. He trusts no one, not even you." You inch closer, careful not to be seen. Their intimacy is subtle, not romantic embraces, not stolen touches. But closeness can be the most dangerous form of forbidden affection. The Queen grips his hand tightly. "You are the only one who listens." And there it is. The spark that births court-wide scandals. An emotional reliance stronger than duty. The advisor withdraws slightly, pained. "If anyone discovers we meet alone, they will assume the worst," she finishes. Her eyes shine with something between fear and longing. But what alternative do I have? He is spiraling, and the kingdom with him. The quirky tidbit? This queen was rumored to write coded messages into her embroidery tiny patterns only her advisor could recognize as distress signals. Birds stitched facing left meant danger, knots in the border meant urgency, and a certain flower motif meant, "Come at once." You glance at the queen's sleeve. The flowers are unmistakable. Before you can breathe, a shadow falls across the hallway. The king, he moves silently, like a man used to sneaking up on conversations he's not supposed to hear. His expression is a masterpiece of restraint, his jaw tight, his eyes burning with betrayal that's been waiting for a spark. He gestures for you to step aside. You do. He leans toward the door, watches, listens, and something inside him fractures. He pushes the door open. The queen gasps. The advisor instinctively drops her hand and stands. The king's voice is ice. "Enjoying yourself?" The room freezes. 3 lives hinge on a single breath. The advisor bows deeply. "Your Majesty, you misunderstand." "Do I?" The king snaps. "My wife whispers secrets in the dark with my closest ally. What could I possibly be misunderstanding?" The queen steps forward, eyes blazing. "Nothing improper happened." "That," the king says slowly, "is not the point. Here comes the scholarly debate requirement. Historians still argue whether the queen and advisor were romantically involved or whether jealous rivals exaggerated their closeness to weaken both their positions. Some chroniclers claim the two plotted against the king. Others insist they never crossed the line. A few suggest the king's own insecurities created the scandal more than any real affair. Tonight, you watch the king wrestle between hurt, suspicion, and political fear. The advisor lowers his head. "Majesty, she was confiding in me about matters of state." The king's voice shakes. "And you think that excuses this betrayal?" The queen's voice breaks. "It wasn't betrayal, it was desperation." The king turns toward her. "Desperation for him?" Silence. Then the queen says something so quiet you barely catch it. "I needed someone who saw me." The king looks as though she struck him. This is no longer a scandal of lust, it's a scandal of loneliness. And lonely kings are dangerous. He gestures to the guards outside. "Escort my advisor to the eastern tower. He is not to leave it." The queen gasps. "No!" The advisor doesn't resist. He bows once more deeply, painfully. "Majesty, I pray you see reason." The king does not respond. Guards lead him away, torchlight flickering across his face as he disappears down the hall. The queen crumples onto the bench, covering her mouth. Tears slip down her cheeks. The king sinks into a chair, suddenly exhausted, suddenly older. He whispers, "I trusted him more than any brother." You're close enough to hear the second whisper he tries to swallow, "And she trusted him more than she trusts me." For a long moment, no one speaks. The only sound is the soft crackle of candle flame. This triangle, fragile, painful, misunderstood, will shape the kingdom for years. Nobles will take sides, rumors will grow teeth, accusations will multiply. And the king, already paranoid, already wounded, will carry this betrayal like a brand, because political scars heal slowly, but emotional ones never quite do. You leave the queen's chamber behind, the echo of her quiet sobs following you like a draft that slips. Under every door, The corridors feel colder now, emptier, like the palace itself wants distance from what you just witnessed. But the deeper you walk, the more you sense something else rising behind the stone walls. Tension, coiled tight like a spring. Because the king you're approaching now, the same man wounded by betrayal, torn by faith, and cornered by enemies, is entering a new and far darker phase of his rule. Tonight, you step quietly into the heart of a scandal born not from outside forces, but from inside his own mind. The crown's curse of paranoia. You enter his private audience chamber, a long, echoing room where only 3 lamps burn despite the night's deep chill. Shadows pool in corners like they're listening in. And at the far end, hunched over a set of unopened scrolls, sits the king. His posture is rigid. His hands tremble, not with illness, not with age, but with suspicion. He hears your footsteps and looks up sharply, eyes darting like a man expecting an ambush. "Close the door," he whispers. You do. He exhales, but the relief is brittle, already fading, already replaced by the next fear. On the table before him lies a pile of letters tied with a black cord. Royal seals cracked, ink smudged, words circled in red. Names crossed out so violently they've torn the parchment. He gestures at them. Read. You pick up the first letter. It's harmless, polite, a noble offering congratulations for a recent victory. But the king taps a finger above a particular word. Strength. See? He whispers. You don't. He leans closer. It's a warning. Hidden. He thinks I'm weak. Oh boy. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Several medieval kings fell into spirals of paranoia, imprisoning advisors, executing nobles, and staging midnight trials based on rumors or imagined slights. Stress, illness, isolation, and political pressure pushed many rulers from caution into fear, and from fear into tyranny. Tonight's king is walking that razor's edge. He grabs another letter, this one from a bishop. Read this. You skim it. It's a bland report about preparations for a feast. But the king points again. Notice how he mentions the candles 3 times? Why? Why candles? Why emphasis? What is he implying? That you need more sleep, probably. He sinks back into his chair, rubbing his temples. They think I don't notice. They think I'm blind. But I see every plot, every signal, every coded phrase. You glance around the room. The shadows feel thicker, heavier, more alive. A quiet knock interrupts the moment. The king freezes, then whispers, Did I summon someone? You shake your head. His eyes widen. His hand goes to the dagger at his belt. Who is it? Before you can answer, the door creaks open and a trembling scribe enters. Majesty, forgive me. A message arrived. The king snatches it with a speed that makes the scribe flinch. He tears the seal and reads the contents. Silently, and you watch the blood drain from his face. Not because the letter contains a threat, but because it doesn't. It's just a list of supplies needed for an upcoming hunt, completely innocent, utterly mundane. But paranoia doesn't read innocence. The king whispers. He mentions spearheads. Why spearheads? Then louder. Is this a threat? The scribe stammers. No, sire, it's just the inventory. Liar. The scribe pales. Majesty, remove him. The king snaps. He's hiding something. Guards drag the poor man away before he can protest. You watch, throat tight, because this is the transformation others fear. The king no longer sees enemies. He sees everyone as enemies. The quirky tidbit? This king once ordered the castle pigeons to be interrogated because they kept landing near a window he suspected noble spies were using. The pigeons were, of course, useless in questioning, but he insisted they looked guilty. Tonight, he is very much that same man. A creak near the window makes him whirl around, dagger raised. It's the wind, you say softly. He doesn't lower the blade. Not immediately. Wind can hide assassins, he mutters. You don't point out that assassins generally have more mass than gusts of air. He turns back to the table, opening yet another scroll, the wax still warm. He scans it, reads it twice, 3 times. I knew it, he whispers. What? You ask. He points to a line that says simply, We look forward to meeting you at dawn. He leans in close, voice barely audible. No one meets at dawn unless plotting something. No one. You want to tell him dawn is a perfectly normal meeting time, especially for hunts, councils, or diplomatic arrivals. But something stops you. A sound. From behind the door, the king hears it too. He lunges to the lock and bolts it shut. Then he drags a chair in front of it. Not enough. He moves a chest against the chair. Still not enough. He pushes a table against the chest. You watch in stunned silence as he barricades himself inside his own audience chamber. When he finishes, he steps back, panting, eyes wild. "You see?" he says hoarsely. "They're moving against me. They whisper at supper. They pause when I enter rooms. They exchange glances during council. They send meaningless letters to confuse me." He presses his palms to his temples. "They want to unmake me." Here comes the scholarly debate requirement. Historians still argue whether this king's paranoia was rooted in real threats, psychological deterioration, political manipulation, or a mixture of genuine fear and overwhelming stress. Some say he faced legitimate conspiracies. Others claim his advisors turned his fear into a tool of control. A few insist he inherited a fragile mind, and at least one chronicle suggests certain treatments from his physicians made things worse. You watch him now, breathing hard, eyes darting, fingers trembling over letters he can no longer trust. He whispers to himself, "If I trust no one can betray me." His gaze lifts to you. "You're quiet," he says. "Too quiet." Your heart lurches. He steps closer. "Are you hiding something?" You shake your head. He studies you, long, deep, unblinking. Then, finally, his shoulders sag. He sinks into his chair, head in his hands. "I am losing myself," he whispers, "and I cannot let them see." Outside, footsteps echo distantly down the hall. The king lifts his head, fear returning instantly. "They're coming." "For what?" you ask gently. He answers in a voice small as a child's. "For my crown." You stay with him as the torches flicker low, realizing something chilling. Some kings fall to armies, some fall to scandal, some fall to fate. But this one is falling inward, one suspicion at a time. You leave the barricaded chamber with your pulse still thrumming from the king's rising paranoia, but the castle doesn't give you a moment's rest. The air shifts again, growing colder, sharper, laced with the scent of wet wool and mud tracked in from a recent campaign. Servants hurry past you, carrying armor, rolled-up maps, and damp standards still crusted with travel dust. You follow the trail until it leads you into a grand hall where the atmosphere is thick with unease. Advisors stand in clusters, murmuring urgently. Captains keep their eyes fixed on the floor. No one is smiling. No one is celebrating. Which is strange, because the king has just returned from a military expedition, one that was supposed to be a triumph, one that was announced with full fanfare, blessings, trumpets, promises, and a ridiculous speech involving destiny, divine favor, and at least 3 metaphors about lions. But tonight, there is no triumph. You step into the war room, and there sits the king, armor still on, mud clinging to his boots, eyes fixed on a map pinned beneath a dagger. He doesn't look like a victorious commander. He looks like a man who desperately wants the world to believe something that simply isn't true. Because tonight's scandal is one medieval court's worked overtime to hide a king's embarrassing military blunder. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Medieval kings, even the most celebrated, lost battles sometimes spectacularly, and their courts often rewrote or disguised the disaster to preserve royal reputation. Reports were altered. Chroniclers adjusted facts. Victories were proclaimed even in the face of humiliating retreats. And tonight, you're watching the beginning of one such cover-up. The king doesn't look at you when you enter. He just mutters, "Close the doors." You obey. The latch clicks like a confession. He gestures to the map, specifically to a river drawn in deep blue ink. "That," he says through clenched teeth, "should not have been there." You blink. "Majesty, it's a river." "It was supposed to be shallow," he snaps. "Easily crossed. That's what my scouts told me." He slams a fist onto the table. The map trembles. Turns out, the river wasn't shallow. It was swollen from early snowmelt, twice as wide, twice as deep. And the king, eager for glory, eager to prove himself after months of political turmoil, ordered his entire army to cross anyway. It went badly. Very badly. The quirky tidbit, his horse refused to enter the water and had to be coaxed with apples while the king shouted about divine destiny. Not exactly a legendary battlefield moment. One of the commanders clears his throat. Majesty, the men were not prepared. We lost wagons, supplies, several siege engines. And I slipped. The king snaps. Everyone goes quiet. Majesty, the commander says carefully. What matters is that we survived. The king looks personally insulted by the word survived. It stings, because survival means you didn't win. It means you're explaining instead of boasting. He rips a scroll off the table. This, he hisses, is the official report the nobles expect. The report describes a glorious maneuver, a calculated repositioning, an unexpected tactical brilliance, a victory of strategic flexibility. You try not to laugh. The king tosses it aside. Lies. All of it. For a moment, just a moment, he looks like a human instead of a monarch. Tired, muddy, humiliated. But then the mask returns. He straightens. His voice hardens. And he orders, rewrite it. Make the river incident sound intentional. A scribe unrolls fresh parchment. Of course, Majesty. Perhaps something like, the king led a daring aquatic maneuver. Not aquatic. The king snaps. Strategic. Of course, strategic aquatic maneuver. The king groans. Here comes the scholarly debate requirement. Historians. We still argue whether this infamous river crossing was an unfortunate accident, a miscalculation, or a foolish act of pride by a king desperate to prove himself. Some chronicles hint the scouts warned him. Others insist he ignored advice. A few claim the king blamed the weather to save face. One foreign account simply says, the king tested the river, and the river won. Not helpful. A captain steps forward. Majesty, the nobles will want explanations for the losses. The king snaps. Tell them the enemy sabotaged the crossing. But Majesty, the captain says gently, there was no enemy. Then invent one, the king shouts. The captain winces. An invisible enemy? The king's eye twitches. A steward moves in cautiously. Majesty, perhaps we should focus on what we did accomplish. The king glares. And what exactly did we accomplish? The steward blinks rapidly. We returned? The king's voice turns low and dangerous. Leave. All of low, they scatter like frightened birds. Finally, the king sinks onto a bench, rubbing his temples. Mud flakes from his armor like symbolic shame. I wanted, he murmurs, just once, to be the hero they think I am. You sit beside him. Quiet. Present. He stares at the map, voice breaking. Do you know what the men whispered after I fell in the river? You shake your head. They said the fishes bowed to me. You suppress a smile. They weren't bowing, he mutters. They were nibbling. Oh no. Silence stretches, heavy and awkward. After a long while, he stands, straightens his cloak, lifts his chin, rebuilds his kingly facade piece by piece. They will not know, he says. They will hear of victory. They will celebrate. They will believe. You realize then what medieval courts understood deeply. Glory is fragile. Reputation is curated. Victory is sometimes just good storytelling. And this king muddy boots, soaked pride, and all is about to step back into the great hall and announce triumph. Because in medieval Europe, a king can survive humiliation, but a king cannot survive looking humiliated. You leave the war room behind, the scent of river mud and bruised pride fading as you move deeper into the palace's quietest corridors. The torches burn lower here, their flames trembling as though they know they're illuminating something fragile, something the king would never want seen in daylight. Because tonight, you're not entering a council chamber, or a treasury, or a chapel. You're stepping into the mind of a king who secretly longs for the one thing no monarch is allowed to want: to disappear. The hallway ends at a small, nearly forgotten door, plain wood, no ornamentation, no guards. You push it open and find a narrow chamber lit by a single candle. The room feels different from the rest of the palace. Calmer, quieter, more personal. And there, sitting at a small desk, is the king. Not the armored king, not the paranoid king, not the furious or humiliated or suspicious king, but a man in simple clothes, cloak draped over the back of a wooden chair, crown nowhere in sight. He looks older here, smaller, human. His hands hover over a partially written letter. The parchment is covered in scratch marks from where he's rewritten the same sentence 6 different ways. I cannot do this anymore. You step closer, and he startles not with anger, but with shame. Don't, he murmurs. Don't look at that. But the quill in his hand trembles. The exhaustion in his posture cannot be hidden. He hasn't come here to rule, or plot, or judge. He's come here to think the unthinkable. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Several medieval rulers attempted or seriously considered abdicating their thrones. Some fled into monasteries. Some vanished during hunts. Some faked their own deaths with varying degrees of success. Others simply disappeared from records, their fates, debated endlessly by historians. You watch him now, staring at the letter like it's a confession carved from his bones. I used to believe, he says softly, that God chose me. He laughs once, bitterly. Now, I wonder if he's waiting for me to return the favor and choose someone else. He leans back, letting his head hit the wall behind him gently. No one tells you, he whispers, that kingship is a cage. A golden one, yes, but bars are bars. He stands abruptly, pacing the small chamber. Every day I wake to a new crisis, a new conspiracy, a new accusation, a new tragedy. They think I'm made of iron. He stops, touching his chest. But I am only a man. You watch him move toward a window, the kind that doesn't face the grand courtyard or the city beyond. This one looks out toward the distant hills, dark and quiet under the moon. Do you see that? He asks. The mountain pass? You nod. That road leads to the coast, and from the coast to anywhere. His voice softens into something almost childlike. Sometimes I imagine leaving, walking out without a crown, without guards, without expectations. I could be a fisherman, a merchant, a scholar, anyone but this. The quirky tidbit. This king once disguised himself as a commoner and slipped into a nearby town for 4 hours. During that time, he overpaid for bread because he didn't know how bargaining worked, got lost in an alley and had to ask a child for directions, accidentally insulted a blacksmith's wife, and was nearly arrested for loitering. When guards finally retrieved him, he claimed he learned more in those 4 hours than in 4 months of counsel. He returns to the desk now, picking up the unfinished letter. His hand hovers over the page, unable to write the next word. Do you know what my advisors would say if they found this? He lowers his voice to a mocking whisper. Majesty, you must rest. Majesty, you are overwhelmed. Majesty, drink this disgusting potion. He sighs. They never say the one thing I need to hear. It's all right to stop. He sets the quill down and closes his eyes. Here comes your scholarly debate requirement. Historians still argue whether this king truly tried to abdicate or merely contemplated it during moments of despair. Some say he drafted a formal declaration but burned it. Others believe he attempted to leave the palace one night but was intercepted. A few claim he confessed his desire only to a single confidant, someone who never revealed his secret. And then there are the rare accounts that insist he did escape, and that the man who ruled in his place afterward was not the same king at all. Myths, of course. Probably. You watch the king sit again, rubbing his forehead as if he's holding back a tidal wave of emotion. Everyone needs me, he whispers. Everyone demands something. Everyone watches. If I falter, I doom them. All. He glances at the window once more. But what happens when the king breaks? He pulls open a drawer. Inside lies a small leather satchel packed. Clothing, food, a map, a knife, coins, a traveller's cloak. He slams it shut quickly, ashamed. Some nights, he murmurs, I almost go. Lightning flickers outside, illuminating the chamber for a brief moment, and in that flash, the king looks unlike any version of himself you've seen. Not powerful, not paranoid, not proud, just tired, so incredibly tired. He closes his eyes, letting the darkness settle over him. "They think I fear conspirators," he whispers. "But the truth—" His voice cracks. "I fear waking up each day to be the king again." He rests his forehead on the desk, breathing slowly, painfully. You stand beside him, silent witness to a truth no scribe will ever record. Some kings wage wars, some battle rivals, some confront enemies. But this king, he is fighting himself every morning, every night, every moment he wears the crown. And the battlefield inside him might be the hardest one he will ever survive. You leave the quiet chamber where the king hides his travel satchel, his secret dream of escape, and slip back into the larger arteries of the palace. The mood shifts again. Gone is the lonely ache of a monarch wanting to vanish. Now the air feels taut, electric, buzzing with ambition that doesn't belong to the king at all. This ambition belongs to someone standing just outside the throne's shadow. Someone with royal blood, someone with charm, someone with dangerous dreams of their own. Tonight, you're stepping straight into the scandal the court tries hardest to pretend isn't happening. A royal brother's treasonous dream. You walk down a pillared hallway toward the inner solar, the private gathering chamber for members of the royal family. The sound reaches you before the doorway does low laughter, hushed voices, clinking goblets. But there's something else too. Something sharper. Whispers. You push open the carved oak door and see him. The king's brother. He stands near the window, bathed in pale light, wearing a smile just a shade too confident for someone without a crown. He's surrounded by a few nobles, young, ambitious, the sort who attach themselves to whoever seems likely to rise. When he sees you, he lifts his goblet in greeting, charming as any bard's hero. But charm, you realize, is his armor. And his weapon, here's your mainstream historical fact. Sibling rivalry among medieval royals frequently turned into rebellions, coups, exiles, and full-scale wars. Brothers claimed the throne, half-brothers challenged succession, uncles overthrew nephews, dynasties split over insecurities and ambition. Tonight's rivalry is reaching its quiet boiling point. The prince, let's call him what he truly is. A would-be king leans against the stone archway, speaking in a tone meant to be overheard. "The people praise me in the markets," he says casually. "Funny, isn't it? They say I look more like a king than a tired accountant." A nobleman snorts. "They mean your brother." The prince flashes his teeth. "Do they? I hadn't noticed." But he had. He notices everything. You step closer. The nobles grow quieter, a sure sign you're getting near the truth. He gestures toward a table covered in small, carved figurines, soldiers, towers, ships. A map lies beneath them. A war map. No, not a war map. A succession map. You pick up one figurine. It's shaped like a king. The prince plucks it from your hand playfully. "Careful," he murmurs. "That piece wobbles easily." You can't tell if he means the figurine or the king himself. A captain of the guard enters silently and whispers something to the prince. The prince nods, eyes glinting, and dismisses him with a wave. You catch a fragment of their whisper. Men, gathering support. "Loyal to you, my lord, if the throne should change hands." Your pulse quickens. The nobles shift uneasily, sensing the moment tipping from gossip into treason. The prince pours wine with steady hands. "Tell me," he says lightly to his companions, "do you ever wonder what would happen if a king stepped aside?" A lady-in-waiting lowers her eyes. Majesty would never abdicate. The prince tilts his head. Would he need to? Silence, the queen's scandal, the vanished heir, the debts, the paranoia, the failed campaign. The prince lists these in casual conversation, like one would list poorly prepared dinner courses. "Someone must rule," he murmurs. "The kingdom needs stability, confidence, clarity." He places the crown figurine on the map, just an inch to the left, just enough to rest at the edge of his own territory. The quirky tidbit: this prince was known to practice royal speeches in front of a mirror when he thought no one was listening, reciting coronation vows with a flourish, imagining crowds cheering his name. Servants heard everything. One even reported that he bowed to his own reflection afterward. He picks up a goblet, swirling the wine. "If the king cannot lead," he says quietly. Then the kingdom must consider alternatives, for the good of the realm. His companion's exchange looks half fear, half excitement, but you notice something they don't. Someone else is watching. In the corner stands a servant boy, frozen, eyes wide. You recognize him, a kitchen runner, barely 12. He's holding a tray he was supposed to deliver to the queen. His hands are trembling so badly that wine sloshes over the rim. The prince follows your gaze. "Ah," he says softly. "A witness." The boy drops to his knees. I didn't hear. I swear. I'll forget everything." The prince kneels beside him, smiling gently, placing a hand on the boy's shoulder. "Of course you will," he says warmly. "Because you're loyal, aunt." The boy nods frantically. "Yes, my lord." The prince squeezes his shoulder. Not painfully. Just enough to make the message clear. Silence is survival. The boy flees as soon as he's released. The prince returns to the window, staring out across the courtyard toward the king's tower. His voice shifts, becoming lower, darker. "He is faltering," he whispers. We all see it. He is drowning in shadows, making enemies of allies, chasing ghosts. You can feel the shift in the room. This is no longer speculation. This is momentum. The prince lifts the crown figurine again. He holds it in his palm, weighing it. Then he whispers a single sentence that freezes the air. If he cannot hold the throne, someone else must. And in that moment, you understand. Some kings fall to invasion, some fall to scandal, some fall to fear. But this king, he may fall to the ambition of the one person he should have been able to trust. His own blood. You slip out of the inner solar, the prince's voice echoing in your ears, smooth, confident, treasonous. The palace feels different now, like the walls themselves are bracing for impact. A storm is gathering, but not the kind that rattles rooftops. This one rattles loyalties. You move through the torchlit corridors toward a wing of the castle most visitors never see. It's quieter here, softer, filled not with soldiers or scribes or bishops, but with laughter. Whispered jokes, the clink of goblets, the rustle of silk. This is where the king spends his evenings, not with counselors, not with generals, not even with family, but with his favorites. Because tonight you're stepping into one of the most notorious scandals of medieval royal courts. A court ruled by favorites. You push open a carved door and find the king in a beautifully decorated chamber, warm, bright, filled with cushions, music, and people who look far too relaxed for the state of the kingdom. He sits in the port, the center of it all, not wearing his crown, but wearing something far more dangerous. Ease, comfort, dependence, the soft vulnerability of a ruler who needs to forget. Around him drift a small group of young courtiers, attractive, witty, indulgent. They hover like eager moths circling a candle, laughing at every joke, praising every gesture, pouring wine before he can ask. Some kings had mistresses, some had lovers, some had religious advisors. But this king, he has favorites. People chosen not for their skill or wisdom, but for how they made him feel. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Throughout medieval Europe, kings often raised certain individuals, friends, companions, lovers, entertainers, to enormous influence, sometimes letting them shape policy, control access, and decide matters far beyond their competence. Courts feared these favorites more than rival nobles. Tonight's favorites are reveling in that fear. The king laughs at a joke, loud, genuine, almost youthful. You haven't heard him laugh like that in days, weeks, maybe longer. One favorite, a charming man with soft curls and a dangerously smug smile, leans over the king's shoulder, refilling his goblet. "Majesty," he purrs, "you mustn't worry about the council. They thrive on drama. Let them squabble." Another favorite, a young woman dressed in emerald silk, adds, "Yes, sire, you deserve peace tonight. Let the world wait." The king melts into their flattery like warm wax. But behind them, lurking near the walls, you see the other side of this cozy scene. Two nobles watching with stiff posture, gritted teeth, and murderous eyes. A steward wringing his hands, unsure if he should interrupt. A guard shifting uneasily, as if standing too close to treason itself. Because everyone knows the truth. The favorites have more influence than half the council, maybe more than the queen, maybe more than the prince, and they know it. The quirky tidbit? One of these favorites once convinced the king to replace the royal council meeting with a poetry contest, an event that later chroniclers delicately described as ill-timed and poorly received. The kingdom was negotiating a peace treaty that day. Tonight, you can feel the same dangerous frivolity bubbling. One favorite plucks a lute, another drapes a fur cloak around the king's shoulders, a third whispers something in his ear that makes him blush like an adolescent. You watch the king sip his wine too quickly, too often. His cheeks redden, his posture softens, and the favorites close in. One of them takes a scroll from the steward's hands without asking, "What's this?" "A request for permission to deploy troops in the south, my lord," the steward says nervously. The favorite rolls his eyes dramatically. "Boring. Set it aside." The king nods lazily. "Yes, yes. Later. Later means never." Another scroll appears, a ledger of supplies needed for the winter. A favorite snatches it. "Oh, Majesty, dull, dull, dull. Who cares about turnips?" The king waves a hand. "Not tonight." The nobles in the corner nearly combust with rage. You see it now, the delicate chain reaction forming. The king depends on the favorites for comfort. The favorites depend on the king for power. The nobles resent the favorites' influence. The favorites dismiss the nobles as old, humorless, and irrelevant. And the kingdom? Teetering between indulgence and catastrophe. A servant approaches nervously. "Majesty, your brother requests an audience." The king stiffens. The favorites immediately close ranks. "No," one says. "Not him." Another murmurs. "He brings nothing but worry," a third adds. The king bites his lip. "Tell him. Tomorrow." The servant bows and retreats. You watch the favorites exchange, satisfied smirks, as if they've just won some private game. Historians still argue whether the king was manipulated by these companions or willingly surrendered to their charm. Some say they flattered him into foolish decisions. Others say the king used them as an escape from a court he no longer trusted. A few insist the favorites were scapegoats, blamed for mistakes the king himself made. But tonight, watching him now, leaning against the cushions, letting them stroke his ego and shield him from reality, you see the truth. He needs them, or believes he does. A favorite pours more wine. Another plays a soothing melody on the lute. A third leans in, murmuring, "You are beloved, Majesty. You owe nothing to those who bring you misery." The king closes his eyes, swaying slightly. "Do you hear that?" he whispers. "Beloved. You hear it too. But you also hear what lies underneath. Addiction. Dependence. Blindness." The door swings open suddenly hard, loud. A guard steps in, breathless. "Majesty, the northern lords have arrived unannounced. They demand your presence immediately." The king blinks slowly, head clouded with wine, and prays. One favorite takes his hand. "You don't have to go." Another whispers, "They can wait." A third adds, "You deserve rest." For a moment, the king teeters on the edge of duty and the warm, numbing comfort of this room. And then he whispers, "Tell them, I am indisposed." The guard hesitates. "Majesty, go," the king snaps. The guard bows tensely and disappears. A silence follows, a heavy, damning silence. "See?" A favorite croons, "You choose peace." But the truth? The king hasn't chosen peace. He's chosen escape, and the kingdom will not forgive him for it. As you leave the chamber, the laughter swells again, soft, flattering, poisonous. You realize then, some kings lose their crowns to enemies, some lose them to scandals. But this king, he risks losing his to the people he trusts the most, because trust, in the wrong hands, becomes ruin. You leave the favorite's chamber behind, the laughter echoing down the corridor like a bright, mocking reminder of how far the king has drifted from the world he's supposed to rule. But as you step deeper into the silent heart of the palace, the mood changes again. It grows heavier, slower, more final. Because tonight, you're walking into the last and perhaps most devastating scandal of this king's troubled life. The scandal that outlived the king. You enter a long stone gallery lined with torches that burn low, their flames steady and mournful. At the end of the hall, 2 guards stand stiffly beside a door draped in dark cloth. Their faces are blank, but their posture tells you everything. The king is dying. You step inside quietly. The room is dim, lit only by a handful of candles and a single narrow window admitting a thin blade of moonlight. The king lies in a great 4-poster bed, but there is nothing grand about him now. His cheeks have hollowed, his breath rattles, his hands once clutching swords, scrolls, letters, and too many burdens now lie limp on the blankets. You draw closer and notice something strange. There are no favorites at his bedside, no nobles, no advisors, no brother. Even the queen, whose heart is divided between loyalty and betrayal, stands several steps back, hands clasped tightly as if unsure whether she's allowed to approach. The only people near the king are 2 physicians, both subdued, both somber, and a priest murmuring prayers that sound more like whispered apologies. The king opens his eyes when he senses you. His gaze is clouded but searching, as if he's trying to recognize the shadows of his own past. "You," he murmurs, "you've seen too much." You say nothing, you just listen. He coughs weakly. "They will say I was paranoid. They will say I was weak. They will say I failed." He closes his eyes briefly, gathering the little strength he has left. But they won't know the truth. You wait. The room waits. Even the candles seem to lean closer. And then he whispers, "There is something they must never discover." A physician leans in. "Majesty, you should rest." But the king waves him off. "No, I must speak." His voice is faint but urgent, the last embers of a fire fighting the night. "You must understand. The scandal, it wasn't the debts, it wasn't the battles, it wasn't the favorites, or the fears." His breath shudders. "It was the lie." You feel the room tighten. "The lie we built, the lie we protected, the lie we lived." The queen whispers, "Which lie, my love?" He turns his head slowly, painfully to look at her, and then he says 4 words that freeze every soul in the chamber. The air is alive. A gasp breaks from the queen's lips. The priest's hands tremble. One physician drops his vial, glass shattering across the floor. You feel the blood drain from your face, because the prince, the vanished boy, the mystery that haunted the kingdom, was believed dead, stolen, hidden, or murdered. But the king continues, each word strained like tearing cloth. "I sent him away, for safety, for escape, for hope. My enemies would have taken him. I lied, to them, to you, to all." He coughs again, violently this time. The queen rushes forward, finally finding her courage, grasping his hand. "Where is he?" But the king doesn't answer. He tries. You see his lips form the beginnings of a name. A location. A truth that could reshape the entire kingdom. But the words never come. His breath catches and stops. Just like that, the king is gone. And his final secret, the truth he carried like a stone in his heart, dies in the air between you all. You stand in the heavy silence that follows, watching the queen collapse beside the bed, tears streaming. The priest begins low prayers. The physicians bow their heads. Outside, a bell tolls 3 times. One noble hears it and mutters, "May God guide his successor." Another hears it and whispers, "May God protect us all." But you hear something else entirely. You hear the sound of a kingdom trembling because the king's last revelation is a fuse waiting to ignite. The heir may still be alive, or may not. The king might have lied in delirium, or might have confessed the single truth he never dared to trust anyone with. And historians still argue endlessly about whether his final words were real, imagined, misheard, or deliberately altered in official records. Some chronicles insist the prince resurfaced years later. Others claim impostors took advantage of the rumor. A few mention a mysterious young traveler with the king's eyes, appearing in distant ports. But the court? Oh, the court weaponized the uncertainty immediately. The prince's possible survival became a scandal, the kind that outlasts a reign, outlives a monarch, and reshapes a kingdom's future. a secret so powerful it continues to echo through time. The truth of a king's final breath. And as you leave the death chamber, the torches flickering behind you, the palace seems to exhale a long, tired sigh from the stones themselves. Kings rise, kings fall, scandals bloom and fade, but the shadows they cast, those live forever. And now, as the last echoes of the king's breath fade into the stone corridors, everything begins to soften. You drift away from the palace halls, away from the whispers, the secrets, the heavy crowns, and the echoing scandals that shaped so many fragile lives. The torches dim behind you, their flickering glow settling into warm embers, each one gently easing into stillness. The night air outside is smoother, cooler, as though the world itself is inhaling deeply and letting its shoulders fall. You walk slowly, unhurried, feeling each step grow lighter. The distant sound of rustling leaves becomes a kind of lullaby. The grass beneath your feet feels softer, almost cloud-like, as if the earth is cushioning your journey back toward calm. You glance once more at the dark silhouette of the castle. But even that harsh architecture, the battlements, the towers, the heavy stone walls, look softer now, wrapped in moonlight like a blanket. Shadows melt into gentle shapes. The wind threading through the ramparts sighs instead of howls. You breathe in, and the air feels cooler at the edges, warm at its heart, a perfect balance. With each exhale, you release a little more of the tension that built up along the way. The scandals, the betrayals, the tangled choices they unravel now, loosening their grip, fading like distant candle smoke. You find a quiet spot beneath an ancient oak tree. Its branches sway slowly above you, steady and rhythmic. A cradle made of leaves. The last threads of moonlight spill softly through, brushing your skin, inviting your thoughts to drift, slower and slower. Everything is calm now. Everything is safe. Everything is quiet. Let your breathing deepen. Let your thoughts soften. Let sleep find you gently. Good night, and sweet dreams.